The moment power stops listening, justice starts taking notes. The lunch rush at Millstone Diner rolled along with the familiar rhythm of clinking coffee mugs, sizzling bacon on the grill, and neighbors greeting one another by name. Sunlight poured through the wide front windows, casting warm reflections across the polished checkered floor, while waitresses moved effortlessly between booths balancing plates of burgers, pancakes, and steaming slices of apple pie. It was the kind of place where everyone believed nothing extraordinary ever happened. In a quiet corner booth near the window, Marcus Ellison unfolded the morning newspaper beside a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and black coffee. Dressed in a plain navy jacket, faded jeans, and a well-worn pair of brown boots, he looked like any other traveler passing through town. His silver hair framed a calm face marked more by quiet confidence than age. He nodded politely whenever a server passed, thanked them by name after reading the stitch tag on each uniform, and never once hinted that he carried responsibilities extending far beyond the county line. To everyone inside the diner, he was simply another customer enjoying a peaceful morning. What no one realized was that less than an hour earlier, Marcus had stepped out of a private policy meeting focused on strengthening public trust in law enforcement. He had declined an official escort, insisting that ordinary conversations in ordinary places often revealed more truth than formal conference rooms ever could. Across the room, waitress Emily Carter smiled as she topped off his coffee. "Anything else I can get you, sir?" she asked. Marcus smiled back. "This coffee is already making my morning better." Emily laughed softly before returning to the counter, unaware that within moments the quiet atmosphere would disappear. The front door burst open with enough force to silence every conversation in the room. Officer Daniel Brooks strode inside wearing a neatly pressed uniform, his expression hard and determined as another patrol officer followed several steps behind. Every head turned. The cheerful hum of the diner dissolved into complete silence, except for the low hiss of the grill. Daniel scanned every table before locking his eyes on Marcus. Without introducing himself or asking a single question, he marched directly toward the corner booth. "Stand up," he ordered firmly. Marcus slowly folded his newspaper and looked up with calm, steady eyes. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked politely. Daniel ignored the question. "Stand up, right now." Nearby customers exchanged uneasy glances while Emily froze beside the coffee station, the pitcher still in her hand. Marcus rose without resistance, keeping both hands visible. "If there's been a misunderstanding," he said evenly, "I'm sure we can clear it up." Daniel stepped closer, his voice loud enough for everyone in the diner to hear. "We've received information about someone matching your description. Until I know exactly who you are, you're being detained." Several customers instinctively reached for their phones. Cameras quietly began recording. Marcus neither argued nor raised his voice. Instead, he looked directly at the officer and spoke with remarkable composure. "Officer, every decision you make over the next few minutes is entirely yours. I only hope you'll be just as confident when every fact is finally on the table." Daniel dismissed the comment with a cold smile, convinced he remained completely in control, unaware that the countdown to the most important phone call of his career had already begun. The quiet confidence that had filled the diner only moments earlier slowly gave way to uncertainty. Nobody returned to their meal. Forks rested untouched on ceramic plates, coffee cooled in forgotten mugs, and conversations dissolved into cautious whispers. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on Marcus Ellison and Officer Daniel Brooks. Daniel reached for his radio and calmly requested an identification check, convinced that the situation would soon confirm his suspicions. Marcus stood exactly where he had been instructed, his posture relaxed, his expression composed, and his voice measured. He neither challenged the officer nor attempted to leave. Instead, he simply waited, as though patience itself had become his strongest response. Emily Carter quietly stepped away from the counter, concern growing across her face. She had served Marcus breakfast several times over the past year, whenever he passed through town. He always ordered the same meal, always thanked every employee, and always left generous tips with handwritten notes encouraging the staff to have a good day. Nothing about the man standing in front of her resembled the dangerous stranger that Officer Brooks seemed determined to find. Another customer leaned toward a friend and whispered that the officer must know something everyone else did not. A different voice answered that mistakes happened, but public accusations could leave scars long after the truth appeared. Daniel continued speaking into his radio, requesting additional records while keeping his attention fixed on Marcus. The officer interpreted the calm silence as unusual confidence, and in his mind that confidence became another reason for suspicion instead of reflection. Marcus glanced toward the front window, where sunlight still streamed across the sidewalk. Families continued walking past the diner without realizing that inside, a single misunderstanding was quietly growing into something much larger. He thought about the meeting he had attended earlier that morning, where elected leaders had spent hours discussing accountability, fairness, and the importance of rebuilding trust between communities and those sworn to protect them. The irony was impossible to ignore, yet he refused to let frustration show on his face. Years in public service had taught him that character revealed itself most clearly when emotions invited easy reactions. Emily carefully approached with a fresh cup of coffee in her hands before stopping several feet away, uncertain whether she should continue. Marcus noticed her hesitation and offered a reassuring smile. "Please do not worry," he said gently. "You have been nothing but kind this morning." His calm words seemed almost out of place against the growing tension inside the restaurant. Several customers lowered their phones, briefly wondering whether they had judged the situation too quickly. Others continued recording, sensing that the story unfolding before them was far from over. A faint crackle finally answered through Daniel's radio. The dispatcher requested additional time because multiple agencies were verifying information connected to the identification provided. Daniel frowned. He expected an immediate confirmation, not delays. In his experience, uncertainty usually strengthened his instincts rather than challenged them. He folded his arms and looked directly at Marcus once again. "Looks like someone has quite a history to sort through," he remarked with quiet confidence. Marcus met his gaze without anger or sarcasm. "Sometimes delays happen because the truth is larger than first impressions," he replied. Those words lingered in the silent diner. They were simple, respectful, and impossible to dismiss completely. Outside, a black sedan turned onto the street and slowed as it approached the parking lot. Inside, nobody noticed it yet. Everyone remained focused on the conversation unfolding only a few feet away, unaware that the next few minutes would transform an ordinary Tuesday morning into a moment the entire town would remember for years. The dispatcher remained silent for several long seconds before another burst of static filled the radio. Daniel Brooks shifted his weight impatiently, convinced the delay was nothing more than an administrative inconvenience. He glanced toward the second officer, standing near the entrance, and gave a confident nod, as though everything was unfolding exactly as expected. Marcus Ellison, however, showed no sign of impatience. He quietly adjusted the sleeve of his navy jacket and looked around the diner with the same calm curiosity he had displayed since walking through its doors earlier that morning. The customers continued watching every movement. Some whispered theories to one another, while others quietly lowered their phones, uncertain whether they were witnessing the beginning of a routine investigation or the unfolding of an unfortunate mistake. Emily Carter finally gathered enough courage to step closer. Her voice was gentle but steady. "Officer, I have served this gentleman several times before. He has always been respectful, and I have never seen him cause any trouble." Daniel acknowledged her with only a brief glance before answering without changing his tone. "Ma'am, I appreciate your opinion, but I have procedures to follow." Emily nodded politely, though the concern on her face only deepened. Marcus offered her another reassuring smile, silently thanking her for speaking without creating unnecessary conflict. His composure puzzled everyone in the room. Most people placed in an uncomfortable public situation would naturally become defensive, frustrated, or embarrassed. Marcus did none of those things. Instead, He appeared almost reflective, as though he understood that every person inside the diner, including Officer Brooks, would remember this morning for reasons that had not yet become clear. Years of public service had taught him that leadership often required restraint when emotions tempted people to react. He remembered lessons from his late father, who had once told him that true dignity was measured not by how people treated you during your best days, but by how you carried yourself during your hardest ones. Those words echoed quietly in his mind while the room around him grew increasingly tense. Near the front counter, two retired veterans who met for breakfast every Tuesday exchanged uneasy looks. One quietly remarked that respect should flow in every direction, whether someone wore a uniform or ordinary clothes. His friend simply nodded, unable to look away from the scene unfolding across the dining room. Outside the large front windows, the black sedan that had entered the parking lot remained motionless. Its engine idled while the driver appeared to be waiting for instructions. Inside the diner, no one paid it any attention. Daniel requested another update over the radio, this time speaking with greater urgency. The response that finally came was unexpected. The dispatcher explained that the identification provided had triggered verification requests from multiple state offices and advised Daniel to remain where he was until a supervising official contacted him directly. Daniel frowned. Multiple state offices made little sense for what he believed was an ordinary field inquiry. Still, he interpreted the unusual response as confirmation that he had uncovered something significant. He looked directly at Marcus once more. "You have certainly attracted a lot of attention," he said with quiet confidence. Marcus answered in the same calm voice that had never wavered. "Sometimes attention arrives because people are searching for the truth. The important part is what they do once they find it." Those words settled over the diner with surprising weight. Even Daniel remained silent for a brief moment before another sound interrupted the stillness. A cell phone began ringing somewhere inside the restaurant. Every head instinctively turned toward the unmistakable tone, unaware that the next conversation would begin shifting the balance of the entire morning. The ringing phone belonged to neither Marcus nor Officer Daniel Brooks. It came from the second patrol officer standing quietly near the entrance, and the sharp tone cut through the heavy silence like a warning that no one could yet understand. He glanced at the screen, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then answered in a low voice before stepping several feet away. His expression shifted almost immediately. The confidence he had carried into the diner faded into visible uncertainty as he listened without interrupting. Daniel noticed the change, but remained focused on Marcus. "Looks like today is becoming interesting," he remarked with a faint smile. Marcus answered with the same steady composure that had never left him. "Interesting days usually reveal more about people than ordinary ones." Daniel dismissed the comment and folded his arms. In his mind, every minute that passed only reinforced his belief that he had made the correct decision. If multiple agencies were checking records, then surely there had to be a reason. He had spent years trusting his instincts, and he saw no reason to question them now. Around the diner, the atmosphere had transformed completely. Fresh customers opened the front door, immediately sensed the tension, and quietly backed away from the counter after seeing everyone staring toward the center of the room. The sizzling grill continued in the kitchen, but even the cooks found themselves looking through the service window instead of preparing the next orders. Emily Carter noticed that Marcus's breakfast still sat untouched on the table. The coffee had gone cold. The toast had hardened. Yet Marcus never complained. He simply stood patiently, occasionally offering reassuring smiles to people who looked far more anxious than he did. One elderly customer finally spoke aloud. "Sir, why are you staying so calm?" Marcus turned toward him with quiet kindness. "Because panic has never helped the truth arrive any faster." The simple answer settled over the room. Several people lowered their eyes, reflecting on the unusual dignity of the man standing before them. At that very moment, the second officer returned from his phone call. He walked directly to Daniel, but stopped just short of whispering distance, clearly unsure whether to speak privately or publicly. Daniel frowned. "What is it?" he asked. The officer answered carefully. "Dispatch says we are to remain here. A senior official is trying to reach you directly. They said it is important." Daniel let out a short breath, almost amused. "Then they can call me themselves." The second officer nodded, but his uneasiness remained. He had heard something in the dispatcher's voice that suggested the situation had grown beyond an ordinary investigation. Outside, the black sedan's driver stepped out and quietly looked toward the diner before checking his watch. He made no move to enter, as though waiting for the exact right moment. Inside, another customer refreshed a live video on a social media page. The viewer count climbed steadily as people across the state began sharing clips from inside the restaurant. Comments poured in, asking who the calm older man was and why such an ordinary breakfast had become the center of so much attention. Daniel remained unaware of the growing audience beyond the diner walls. His attention never left Marcus. "If you have something to explain," he said firmly, "now would be the time." Marcus looked directly into the officer's eyes, his voice neither defensive nor proud. "I have learned that explanations are most valuable when people are finally ready to hear them." Before Daniel could respond, his own cell phone began to ring. The screen displayed an unfamiliar government number. The room fell completely silent as I turned toward the phone in his hand. SUA, Daniel Brooks stared at the unfamiliar number for a brief moment before answering with the confidence of someone who expected nothing more than routine confirmation. He lifted the phone to his ear and spoke in a firm, professional tone. "Officer Daniel Brooks speaking." The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and unmistakably official. "Officer Brooks, this is the communications office for the State Police Command. Remain where you are. Your supervising chief is attempting to reach you. Do not conclude your investigation until you receive further instruction." Daniel glanced around the diner, noticing dozens of curious faces waiting to see what would happen next. He lowered the phone slightly before responding. "Understood, but I have the situation under control." The caller paused for a moment. "That determination is not yours to make at this time. Your chief will contact you shortly." The line disconnected. Daniel slipped the phone back into his pocket, forcing a confident expression that no longer matched the uncertainty beginning to grow inside him. He looked toward Marcus Ellison, expecting to see concern or anxiety. Instead, Marcus remained exactly as he had been from the beginning, standing quietly beside the booth with steady eyes and relaxed shoulders. His calm presence seemed almost impossible to disturb. Emily Carter watched both men carefully. She had never witnessed anyone remain so composed while becoming the center of attention in a crowded restaurant. It was not the confidence of someone trying to win an argument. It was the quiet assurance of someone who understood that truth did not need to compete with emotion. Around the diner, whispers grew louder. Customers exchanged theories, wondering why state officials had suddenly become involved in what appeared to be a simple local investigation. A retired school principal sitting near the window quietly remarked that ordinary identification checks rarely required calls from multiple government offices. His wife nodded without taking her eyes off Marcus. Outside, the black sedan remained parked near the entrance. The driver checked his phone, looked toward the building once more, and continued waiting with remarkable patience. Inside, another notification sounded from someone's mobile phone as clips from the diner spread rapidly across social media. People from neighboring towns began recognizing Marcus's face, but those inside the restaurant had not yet seen the growing online discussion. Daniel folded his arms once again, determined not to let uncertainty influence his decisions. "Until I receive different instructions," he said firmly, "my responsibility remains exactly the same." Marcus acknowledged the statement with a respectful nod. "Responsibility is important," he replied. "So is remembering that every decision becomes part of someone else's story." Those words lingered in the silence. They carried no anger, no accusation, and no attempt to embarrass anyone. They simply invited reflection. Even the second patrol officer shifted uneasily, sensing that the situation was moving toward a conclusion none of them had anticipated. Then Daniel's radio crackled again. This time the dispatcher's voice carried unmistakable urgency. Officer Brooks, your chief is on a secure line and requests immediate contact. He has instructed that you answer without delay. Daniel reached for the radio microphone, expecting another procedural conversation. Instead, the dispatcher added one final sentence that caused every person standing close enough to hear to exchange nervous glances. Your chief specifically instructed us to tell you that the next 5 minutes will determine the future of your career. Daniel Brooks swallowed quietly before pressing the secure line connection. The familiar voice of Police Chief Harold Whitaker came through immediately, but there was none of the casual confidence Daniel had expected. Every word was deliberate, controlled, and unusually measured. Officer Brooks, listen carefully. I need you to answer one question before you say another word. Is the gentleman still inside the diner? Daniel glanced toward Marcus Ellison, who remained standing beside the booth with the same calm expression that had unsettled everyone in the room. Yes, Chief. He is right here. A brief silence followed. It lasted only seconds, but it felt much longer. Finally, the chief spoke again. Good. Do not allow this situation to become any more public than it already has. Treat him with complete professionalism while we verify final details. Daniel frowned in confusion. Chief, dispatch indicated several agencies became involved. I assumed there was a criminal matter connected to his identification. Another pause. Your assumptions are exactly why I need you to slow down, the chief answered. The verification process is not about criminal records. It is about confirming government credentials that require authorization from multiple state offices. Daniel looked back toward Marcus, searching his face for some sign that would explain the growing mystery. Instead, Marcus simply stood quietly, making no attempt to interrupt the conversation. His patience no longer appeared unusual. It seemed intentional. Around the diner, customers continued watching every movement. Nobody spoke above a whisper. Even the kitchen staff had gathered near the service window, sensing that whatever happened next would change everything. Emily Carter folded her hands together, silently hoping the situation would end with understanding instead of embarrassment for anyone involved. Chief Whitaker continued speaking. Officer Brooks, another call is coming. When it arrives, you will answer immediately. You will place the phone on speaker if instructed. Do you understand? Daniel nodded before realizing the chief could not see him. Yes, Chief. I understand. Good, the chief replied. Until then, remain respectful. Do not speculate. Do not make additional accusations. Just wait. The line ended. Daniel slowly lowered the phone. His confidence had begun to give way to uncertainty, yet years of habit prevented him from showing it openly. He cleared his throat and looked toward Marcus once more. We are waiting for additional confirmation, he said, his voice noticeably less forceful than before. Marcus acknowledged him with a polite nod. Waiting often gives people the opportunity to see what urgency prevents, he answered. The words were quiet, but they reached every corner of the diner. A retired teacher, sitting near the front window, leaned toward her husband and whispered, "That sounds like someone who has spent a lifetime solving difficult problems." Outside, the black sedan finally moved. It rolled slowly toward the entrance before stopping directly in front of the diner. The driver stepped out wearing a dark business suit instead of a police uniform. He did not enter immediately. Instead, he looked at his phone, appeared to receive a message, and respectfully remained outside the front door. Inside, Daniel's cell phone vibrated again. This time the caller identification displayed a number that everyone in state government recognized, although Daniel had never expected to see it on his own screen. His eyes widened as he read the words displayed beneath the number. The office calling was not another police agency. It was the office of the governor. Daniel Brooks stared at the screen for a heartbeat before answering the call. Every conversation inside the diner stopped completely. Even the soft clatter of dishes from the kitchen faded into the background, as if the entire building understood that something significant was about to happen. Daniel took a steady breath and spoke carefully. Officer Daniel Brooks speaking. A composed voice answered immediately. Officer Brooks, this is Governor William Harrison. Daniel instinctively straightened his posture. Yes, Governor. The governor continued without hesitation. I understand you are conducting an investigation involving a gentleman named Marcus Ellison. Before we continue, I need you to place this call on speaker so everyone directly involved can hear the same information. Daniel hesitated for only a second before pressing the speaker button. The governor's voice filled the quiet diner. Thank you, officer. I appreciate your cooperation. Every customer remained perfectly still. Emily Carter covered her mouth in disbelief. The second patrol officer lowered his eyes, sensing the direction this conversation was taking. Governor Harrison spoke with calm authority rather than anger. Senator Marcus Ellison has been working with my office throughout the past several months on bipartisan legislation concerning public trust, professional accountability, and community partnerships. We concluded a policy meeting earlier this morning, and I personally approved his travel schedule afterward. He is exactly where he is supposed to be. A silence settled over the room, unlike anything that had come before. Daniel slowly turned toward Marcus, whose expression remained thoughtful rather than triumphant. There was no satisfaction on his face, no desire to embarrass anyone. Only the same quiet dignity that had defined every moment since breakfast began. The governor continued speaking. Officer Brooks, public service demands difficult decisions every day. It also demands that we remain open to new information when it becomes available. I expect every public servant in this state, regardless of title or position, to remember that respect is never a reward reserved for the powerful. It is the starting point for every citizen. Several customers lowered their phones, suddenly realizing they had witnessed far more than a misunderstanding. They had watched two very different approaches to authority unfold before their eyes. Marcus finally spoke for the first time since the call began. His voice remained calm and respectful. Governor, thank you for taking the time to clarify the situation. Governor Harrison answered warmly. Senator, I regret that your morning was interrupted. I also know you would prefer that this become an opportunity for learning rather than humiliation. Marcus nodded gently. That has always been my hope. Daniel felt the weight of every eye in the diner. The certainty he had carried only minutes earlier had disappeared, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that first impressions had led him farther from the truth than he had imagined. Before ending the call, Governor Harrison addressed the room one final time. Justice is strongest when humility walks beside authority. I trust everyone present will remember that today. The line disconnected. No one spoke. The only sound inside the diner was the quiet hum of the coffee machine. Outside, the man in the dark business suit finally opened the front door and stepped inside, carrying a leather portfolio bearing the official seal of the governor's office, while Daniel understood that the next conversation would not determine whether a mistake had been made. It would determine how he chose to answer for it. The man from the governor's office walked across the diner with calm, deliberate steps, offering a polite nod to everyone he passed before stopping beside Marcus Ellison. He extended his hand with quiet respect. Senator Ellison, I apologize for the delay. The governor asked me to ensure you have everything you need. Marcus shook his hand warmly. Thank you. I believe everyone here has already had enough excitement for one morning. The gentle remark eased some of the tension that had gripped the room, but it could not erase the weight of what had just happened. Officer Daniel Brooks remained silent, watching the exchange unfold. For the first time since entering the diner, he realized that authority alone could not restore confidence once trust had been shaken. The representative turned toward Daniel with the same courtesy he had shown Marcus. Officer Brooks, Chief Whitaker is on his way. Until he arrives, I have been asked to document the facts exactly as they occurred. Nothing more and nothing less. Daniel nodded slowly. I understand. There was no argument in his voice, only the growing recognition that every choice made that morning would now be reviewed carefully. Around the diner, customers gradually lowered their phones. The story they had expected to capture had become something very different. It was no longer about a dramatic confrontation. It had become a lesson about judgment, patience, and responsibility. Emily Carter quietly returned to Marcus's table. She looked at the untouched breakfast and smiled apologetically. Your coffee is cold, Senator. May I bring you a fresh cup? Marcus smiled with genuine warmth. I would appreciate that very much, Emily. Thank you. Hearing him remember her name brought tears to her eyes. She realized that despite everything that had happened, he still treated every person in the room with the same kindness he had shown when he first walked through the door. Outside, several news vehicles began arriving after seeing reports spreading online, but no reporters entered the diner. Local officers respectfully asked them to remain outside while the situation concluded. Inside, Chief Harold Whitaker finally walked through the front door. His expression was calm but serious. He greeted Marcus first. "Senator Ellison, on behalf of this department, I sincerely regret the way your morning unfolded." Marcus answered without hesitation. "Chief, I appreciate your words. My concern has never been about personal embarrassment. My concern has always been public confidence." Chief Whitaker nodded. "That is exactly why this will receive a complete administrative review." He then turned toward Daniel. His voice remained professional and respectful. "Officer Brooks, effective immediately, you are being relieved of active duty pending the outcome of a formal internal investigation. This decision is administrative and follows department policy whenever an incident raises significant questions about professional conduct and public trust." Daniel lowered his head slightly before removing the items required by department procedure and handing them to the chief without protest. He understood that this moment was no longer about defending his pride. It was about accepting accountability for decisions that had consequences extending far beyond one ordinary morning. Marcus watched quietly before speaking one final time. "Chief, I ask only one thing. Let this investigation focus on learning as much as responsibility. Strong institutions are built when people are willing to improve, not simply when they are willing to punish." The chief looked at Marcus with deep respect and answered, "Senator, that is exactly the standard we will pursue." The diner remained silent, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Fear had given way to reflection. Certainty had given way to humility. And everyone present understood that the strongest form of justice was not found in revenge, but in the courage to let truth reshape the future. The morning crowd slowly returned to their seats, but nobody resumed breakfast quite the way they had before. Something invisible had changed inside the little diner. Conversations became quieter, smiles carried more meaning, and ordinary moments suddenly felt worth appreciating. Emily Carter placed a fresh cup of hot coffee in front of Marcus Ellison, along with a new plate of warm eggs and toast prepared by the cook, who insisted this breakfast belonged to the house. Marcus thanked every member of the staff individually before taking his seat once again by the window. For a few peaceful moments, the room looked almost exactly as it had before the first patrol car arrived. The only difference was that everyone now understood they had witnessed a lesson that reached far beyond a single misunderstanding. Chief Harold Whitaker remained inside long enough to personally thank each employee for their patience before stepping outside to address the growing group of reporters. He offered no dramatic statements and assigned no blame in public. Instead, he reminded the community that accountability depended upon facts, fairness, and the willingness to improve. Those words reflected the same principles Marcus had quietly demonstrated throughout the entire morning. Daniel Brooks paused near the entrance before leaving the diner. He looked back one final time. Marcus noticed him immediately and gave a small, respectful nod. Daniel hesitated, then walked back to the table. His voice carried none of the certainty that had filled it only an hour earlier. "Senator Ellison," he said sincerely, "I cannot change what happened this morning, but I can acknowledge that I should have listened more carefully before reaching conclusions. I am sorry." Marcus looked at him with steady eyes that showed neither resentment nor satisfaction. "Growth begins the moment we become willing to examine our own decisions," he replied. "I accept your apology, and I hope today becomes the beginning of something better for everyone involved." Daniel quietly thanked him before leaving the diner. Outside, the bright afternoon sun reflected across the patrol car as he walked away with a different understanding of what responsibility truly meant. Inside, customers slowly returned to their conversations, Yet many continued thinking about what they had seen. The retired teacher smiled softly and told her husband that respect could never depend on a title. The veterans at the front booth agreed that courage sometimes looked less like winning an argument and more like remaining calm when every reason existed to become angry. Emily glanced toward Marcus as he finally enjoyed the first warm sip of coffee he had been trying to drink since the morning began. She smiled when he thanked her once again, realizing that genuine character often revealed itself through the smallest acts of kindness rather than the loudest displays of authority. Before leaving, Marcus paid his bill, added a generous tip, and wrote a short note on the receipt for the staff. It read, "Thank you for serving every guest with dignity. Never underestimate the difference simple kindness can make." Emily carefully folded the note and placed it behind the counter, knowing she would keep it for years. As Marcus stepped outside, the waiting reporters respectfully held their questions until he chose to speak. He offered only one sentence before entering the waiting sedan. "Justice earns public trust when every person is treated with equal dignity before the truth is known." The car quietly pulled away, leaving the diner exactly where it had always stood, yet forever changed by what had happened within its walls. Some people believed authority came from a badge, others believed it came from a title, but everyone who had shared that ordinary morning learned the same lasting truth. Real justice begins not when power is recognized, but when every human being is respected before judgment is ever made.